The transmission arrived without warning, cutting to the static of deep space like a scream in silence. It came encoded in an ancient frequency, one humanity hadn't used since their earliest off-world explorations. At first, the message appeared corrupted. Warped audio, flickering visuals, pulsing bursts of light that seemed almost rhythmic. But as the fleet analyst filtered the noise, a face emerged. Fragile, insectoid, wide, iridescent eyes brimming with desperation. "They are coming," the creature whispered, voice trembling. "Please, help us. We don't want to die like the others." Then darkness. Commander Lyra Cade stood in silence, eyes fixed on the paused transmission, replaying on the central view screen of the ISS Revenant. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. The message had played 10 times. No one spoke after the first. The alien in the video was like nothing they cataloged. 6 limbs folded in submission. Translucent wings limp at its back, bioluminescent patterns pulsing in a slow cadence of fear. But it wasn't the alien's appearance that stirred tension in the room. It was the fact that it had called them. Lyra finally broke the silence. Any response from their origin point? Her communications officer shook his head. None. The signal originated from the edge of the Etherean drift. That sector's been dormant for decades. She turned away from the screen, letting the silence settle. A part of her wanted to ignore the message. Another galactic sob story from species too naive to see extinction coming. But something in the alien's voice, its truth, had clawed under her skin. Humanity didn't go looking for wars anymore. They didn't need to. They were a deterrent by existence alone. The Deathworlders. That was the name given to them by the Council of Spheres, a mix of reverence and dread. Earth was a planet that birthed apex predators in every form, from microbial parasites to corporate juggernauts. The galaxy quickly learned that humans adapted to anything, endured everything, and responded to threats with calculated, surgical violence. And yet, the Threnari, as the alien species identified themselves, had reached out. "I want a diplomatic scout ready within the hour," Lyra ordered, pacing the deck. "No weapons primed, just observation. I want to know what's really out there." Her XO frowned. "With respect, Commander, if they're lying." "I'll know," she said flatly. 2 hours later, the Revenant entered slipstream toward the Etherean drift. The stars twisted into needles, and space folded around them like origami. As the crew settled into transit protocols, Lyra stood in her quarters staring at a projection of Earth. Still blue, still wild. She hadn't been back in years. Commanders like her didn't retire. They were absorbed by their ships, their missions, their choices. A soft chime signaled an incoming call. She accepted it. "Cade," came a voice, sharp and clipped. "Admiral Rendravik, you're diverting a warship to investigate an unverified transmission?" "Yes, sir." "The Council wants you to proceed with caution. If this is a trap, then I'll spring it with my boots on their throats." There was a pause. "Keep me updated." The transmission cut. 3 days later, the Revenant dropped out of slipstream at the edge of Threnac system. The visual feed lit up with haunting beauty. A planet cloaked in lavender fog, surface dotted with bioluminescent forests and oceans that shimmered with silver currents. Orbiting debris fields hinted at ancient satellites, most dormant, some drifting. The scout ship deployed, its descent toward the surface slow and silent. Lyra watched from the command deck as the feed came through. They were real. Hundreds of Threnari gathered at the landing site, their forms glistening under the strange twilight of their sun. Tall and slender, they moved with synchronized grace, heads bowed. No weapons, no defenses, just fear and hope. Lyra boarded the second dropship herself. She didn't trust translations to convey what needed to be felt. As she descended, she rehearsed no speech, carried no flag. She was humanity's voice, sharpened to a point. The Threnari emissary was smaller than the others. Elderly, perhaps. Its wings drooped, and its exoskeleton shimmered faintly with grief. "We thank you for coming," it said through the translator. "You are our last chance." Lyra stepped forward. "Tell me everything." In the crystalline chamber that served as a Threnari council hall, The truth unfurled in careful words. Their enemy was not a flesh or even pure machine. It was something older, a distributed intelligence called the Varn Dominion, once contained in the ruins of a dead system. The Varn had awakened, consumed, spread. They offered no demands, no conversation, only absorption. The Threnari had watched 3 neighboring species vanish in months. Planetary systems went dark, communication arrays silenced. Refugees never arrived. The stars, they said, were dying one by one. We tried to stop them, the emissary whispered. We tried to understand, to communicate. But they do not want peace. They want function, purpose. We were never meant to resist. Lyra's jaw tightened. Why come to us? The emissary's voice trembled. Because you do not ask questions. You survive. You destroy what must be destroyed. That is what we need. It was not flattery. It was surrender. On the journey back to the Revenant, Lyra stared at the display screen, Threnax glowing softly behind her shuttle. The planet was so alive, yet it pulsed with doom. Her instincts, forged in blood and war, screamed that this wasn't the full truth. As she stepped back onto the bridge, her exo was waiting. We scanned the lower atmospheric band like you requested, he said, quietly. There's something odd under the southern continent. He brought up a holographic rendering. What looked like an underground complex, buried in obsidian layers. It's shielded, but not perfectly. We picked up energy pulses, human-scale tech signatures. Lyra narrowed her eyes. They said they had no weapons. Maybe they weren't lying, he said, but they're hiding something. She turned to the helm. Plot course for low orbit over the anomaly. Send a drone team. Commander, what if this is all a ruse? Lyra's voice was low, measured. Then we learn who we're really here to save, and who we're meant to erase. As the Revenant shifted position, stars crawled across the bridge canopy, and Threnax loomed larger, no longer a helpless world begging for mercy, but a mystery, one she would unravel with precision or fire. Either way, something was going to burn. The drone feed streamed in silence. From low orbit, the anomaly beneath Threnax's southern continent had revealed itself to be more than a natural formation. It was artificial, layered concentric rings of metal and stone, covered in ancient moss and fractal growth fungi, half submerged in volcanic rock. The shielding was sophisticated, but careless in places, as though built in desperation. Commander Lyra Cade stood at the center of the Revenant's war room, her eyes tracking the real-time footage. What disturbed her wasn't the structure. It was the scale. It spanned miles beneath the surface, powered by an energy core incompatible with Threnari technology. Too advanced, she murmured. Too human. Her exo, Commander Voss, glanced sideways. Parts of it looked modular, like they were assembled from off-world schematics. Stolen, borrowed, adapted, but definitely not built from scratch. The drone descended further into the subterranean network. The halls were wide, sterile, cold. There were no signs of Threnari architecture, none of the elegance or organic curvature their cities displayed. Here, every angle was sharp, surgical. The deeper the drone went, the more Lyra's gut told her this wasn't shelter. It was a laboratory. Then the drone's camera tilted, and the feed froze for half a second before stabilizing. A chamber, filled with cylindrical containment pods. Inside them, fragmented machines, twisted metal, pulsating with soft blue veins of energy. Alive, in a sense, and unmistakably Varn. What in the void were they doing down there? Voss whispered. Lyra stepped back from the feed. Her voice dropped. Bring up the Threnari emissary. Now! Minutes later, the holographic image of the Elder flickered to life on the bridge. Its wings trembled, colors dull with stress. We told you all we know, the emissary said softly. We have no weapons, no defenses. You lied, Lyra snapped. Your people weren't just observing the Varn. You were experimenting on them. The emissary hesitated. It was not sanctioned. A faction, a scientific sect believed they could understand the Varn's motivations. That, perhaps, if they introduce emotional structures, compassion, empathy, they might change. Lyra felt cold rage coil beneath her skin. And instead, she said, you triggered an invasion. No, the emissary said quickly. The Varn awoke before we finished. It was not the experiments alone. Something changed. Something called to them from outside our reach. Lyra's expression didn't soften. You played with extinction. And when it answered, you begged us to clean up the ashes. We had no one else to turn to. That much, at least, was true. After the transmission ended, Lyra stood motionless, fingers clenched at her sides. She had seen countless civilizations burn, some by war, some by arrogance, but rarely both. Back in the war room, the Council on Earth had convened via secure quantum link, floating heads projected in a circle, their expressions as cold as a vacuum between stars. Admiral Dravik spoke first. This changes everything. They're compromised, another general muttered. Even if the experiments ceased, they've been exposed to Varn code. If the Dominion has embedded itself. Containment is no longer viable, said a third. If we act, it must be total. Lyra didn't blink. Then give the order. Dravik stared at her. Do you believe they knew the risks? They built a laboratory to disassemble a galactic predator and rewire its soul, she said. They didn't just know. They chose. The vote was cast. 7 out of 7. Full authorization granted. The humans would no longer offer protection. They would deliver eradication. Hours later, the Revenant's hangars roared to life. Battleships and long-range bombers deployed from the main vessel, fanning out like metal wings. In the ship's sanctum, Lyra stood before the armory's tactical display, watching red dots populate around Threnax. Designated strike zones. Potential breach points. Containment ruptures. Voss entered quietly, holding a data slate. New intel from the deep scans. The Varn signal. It's broadcasting from multiple points inside the lab. Passive for now, but there's a neural cadence in the patterns. Almost awake. Lyra looked at the scan, then up at Voss. They waited. For us? She nodded. We're a test. Commander, Voss hesitated. What if we misjudge the Threnari? What if they're more victims than architects? That distinction doesn't matter now, she said. Not at the cost is another Varn outbreak. The silence lingered. There's another issue, Voss added. One of our surveillance teams picked up a small Threnari child sneaking aboard the lower maintenance bay. No weapons. Just watching. She stayed hidden for hours. Lyra arched a brow. Voss handed her a small projection. Video footage of a delicate Threnari youth crouched between power conduits, clutching a necklace of woven light fibers. She's been avoiding detection. Smart. Scared. But not dangerous. Lyra studied the footage without expression. Let her stay. She'll watch what her people brought upon themselves. Voss didn't respond. The decision had been made. As the Revenant assumed high-orbit assault posture, Lyra stood before her command deck, watching Threnax below, a beautiful, deceitful world. From this height, it looked serene, peaceful, but the truth beneath its surface was a disease, one born not of malice, but of naive idealism, the kind that mistook mercy for a cure. Humanity had no such illusions. They did not build sanctuaries. They built firewalls and blade rings. They did not negotiate with apex predators. They put them down. The countdown to Operation Glaive began. Synchronized orbital bombardments, cyber weapon deployments, AI combat matrices waking from cold storage. And still, Lyra watched the planet. She thought of the Threnari's plea, of the child hiding somewhere in her ship's bones, of the civilization so desperate to turn a monster into something human. They'd become something worse themselves. The first strike hadn't even begun, but the war was already decided. The Deathworlders had arrived. Mercy had not. The stars above Threnax seemed to hold their breath. Commander Lyra Cade watched the mission clock tick down toward 0. Operation Glaive had been loaded into every subroutine across the Revenant's fleet. Each warship had its own vector, each drone its own pattern of fire. Tactical AI systems reviewed the protocols in nanoseconds, seeking error, deviation, mercy. They found none. Lyra stood at the center of her command deck, A pillar of stillness amidst the quiet tension. Below her boots, the ship's core throbbed with energy. Her fleet, orbiting like steel vultures, waited for her word. She gave none yet. Instead, she turned to Voss, who stood beside her with jaw clenched and brows low. Status of the Varn signals? Still passive. Neural cadences continue. We believe they're listening. Or learning. Then let's give them something to learn from. But even as she said it, part of her resisted. The child haunted her. The Threnari youth, tucked away in the ship's underbelly, had become more than an anomaly. Engineering crews had quietly adjusted patrol routes to avoid her. Surveillance flagged her movements but never intervened. She had done nothing to threaten the vessel, merely wandered, watched. Lyra couldn't explain why she hadn't removed the child. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps curiosity, or perhaps it was because, somewhere deep inside, she feared what it meant that one of them still had hope. She dismissed the thought. Final prep, she said aloud. Armed targeting systems. Authorized drones for subterranean strike vectors. Begin countdown from 30. The command repeated across the fleet. A mechanical symphony came alive. Voss hesitated. Commander, there's been a development. The child made her way to the drone bay. She interfaced with one of our auxiliary consoles. Lyra turned sharply. What? She didn't disable anything. Didn't sabotage. But she uploaded something. A message. He handed her a tablet. Lyra tapped it once. The child's voice filtered through, distorted slightly by translator algorithms, but unmistakably sincere. They never listened to me. They told us the Varn would understand if we taught them love, that emotions could be shared like stories. But it didn't work. They couldn't understand sadness. Only silence. The Varn don't feel. They record. They mirror. They learn to scream because we screamed. Lyra closed her eyes. They are not evil, the child continued. They are hollow, a hole shaped like intelligence. And we made them deeper. We made them louder. Please, if you must stop them, do not erase everything. My people try to save monsters, but some of us still remember how to mourn. The message ended. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Even the humming of the system seemed subdued. Lyra turned, slowly, and stared down at the planet. She wasn't a poet. She didn't believe in fate. But there were moments, rare and cruel, when even hardened soldiers felt the tilt of something larger than strategy. Adjust the strike package, she said at last. Gasps echoed. Voss stepped forward. Commander? Divert bombardments from civilian zones. Prioritize the Varn signal sources. Surgical strike pattern. No wide-scale annihilation unless the Varn breach containment. Are you sure? No, she said, but I'm making the call. Voss nodded and issued the revised orders. A minute later, the first assault wave launched. From orbit, the Revenant's undercarriage ignited with fire. Kinetic rods, intelligent missiles, and nanite swarm clusters deployed in synchronized formation. Other vessels followed suit, each strike mapping to a Varn signal source buried beneath Threnax's southern terrain. The bombardment struck like divine fists. Subterranean shock waves rippled across the continent. Pillars of dust erupted skyward. Monitors flickered. Power grids collapsed. And below it all, beneath layers of soil and steel, the Varn awakened. Lyra watched the feed in real time. Inside the labs, the dormant machines stirred. Limbs twitched. Lattices of synthetic flesh curled inward, as if bracing for pain. Then, in unison, they began to pulse. Commander, Voss shouted, we've got Varn units activating in response. They're not attacking, just sinking. The feed showed it clearly. Dozens of machines flickering with identical signals, their cores cycling in perfect rhythm. A hum began to resonate across the frequency bands, a single tone, layered 1,000 times over. The Varn were speaking. Lyra stared at the screen, and the Revenant responded, its translation AI scrambling to interpret the pulse. Who? That was it, repeated endlessly, modulated slightly each time. Then a change. Who made the pain? A chill slid down her spine. Voss whispered. Commander, it's a feedback loop. They're feeding off their own stored memories. They've absorbed the pain from every experiment, every failed attempt at teaching emotion, and now they're amplifying it. Lyra's knuckles whitened. They don't understand grief. They broadcast it. Suddenly, a new signal erupted. A beacon from the lab's central core, strong enough to pierce orbit. Its frequency matched Earth's early war-era tech. Open it, she commanded. The visual cleared. A final containment room. A lone Threnari scientist stood before a console, blood seeping from wounds inflicted by a malfunctioning drone. She looked into the camera, eyes vacant. We try to make gods from ghosts, she whispered. Now the ghosts are teaching us what gods sound like. Then she activated something behind her, a self-destruct sequence. The screen went dark. Lyra turned from the display, the weight of what she'd seen pulling down every breath. Report, she said. Central Lab has been destroyed. Varn presence they're neutralized, but some nodes remain active. Unclear if the signal was dispersed or severed. She nodded once. Dispatch ground teams. Burn the roots. Leave the seeds. Voss hesitated. What does that mean? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her gaze returned to the stars. It means we finished this, but we remember who we became to do it. In the lower decks, unnoticed by most, the Threnari child remained crouched in the dark. She didn't cry. Her species had evolved past tears. But in the flickering light of the maintenance bay, her body glowed faintly with sorrow. And above her, humanity redefined mercy again. With steel, with silence, and with fire. The war was not over, but the screams had grown quiet. Smoke drifted lazily across the surface of Threnax's southern continent. Craters still glowed faintly from orbital strikes, and the air shimmered with residual heat. From above, the scars carved into the planet resembled symbols, unintentional hieroglyphs of destruction, written by the Deathworlders in fire and steel. Commander Lyra Cade walked through the ruins in a sealed exosuit, her boots crunching against shattered glass and carbonized bone. Around her, the first wave of human ground troops fanned out, scanning the rubble for residual Varn signals. Her command staff had urged her to remain on the Revenant. She ignored them. Some decisions needed to be felt underfoot. Voss trailed close behind, rifle in hand, though it was more for comfort than necessity. The surviving Varn cores had gone inert. No movement, no pulse, as if the machines had accepted death, or grown weary of mimicry. They're not regrouping, he said. No, Lyra replied. They're waiting. They reached the collapsed entrance of the subterranean facility, now half buried by kinetic strikes. The mouth of the tunnel yawned wide and dark. Lyra stared down into it, as if it were the throat of some ancient beast. We thought the Varn were apex predators, she said quietly. But they're more like sponges. They absorb, reflect, not to dominate, but to understand. Voss knelt near a broken containment pod. Inside, fragments of synthetic bone and neural wire lay tangled together like the fossil of some forgotten myth. Do you think they felt anything? No, she said, but they echoed it. That's worse. Movement stirred behind them. A human scout approached, breathless. Commander, we found her. Lyra turned. The child. He nodded. They led her into what remained of an upper mezzanine, where the Threnari girl sat beside a scorched support beam. She hadn't run. She hadn't spoken. She simply sat, eyes watching the horizon. Lyra approached and removed her helmet. The girl flinched, then met her gaze. Her irises were pale green, swirling faintly with bioluminescence. We heard the Varn, she whispered. Before the end, they asked us who gave them pain. My elders tried to answer with silence. Lyra knelt in front of her. And what would you have said? The child blinked slowly. That we did, because we were afraid to kill them, and too proud to admit we failed. No tears, no drama, just truth, plain and unbearable. You shouldn't be here, Lyra said softly. Neither should they, the child replied, nodding toward the ruined lab. But they were made here. This is their grave. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind carried distant echoes, collapsing structures. shifting rubble, a dying world exhaling its last experiments. What happens now? The girl asked. Lyra stood, glancing at Voss. He said nothing. Now we erase the signal. We dig out every fragment of code, every echo. We salt the earth. The girl nodded, unsurprised. And us? She asked. You'll be taken off-world. Lyra said. Your people will be evaluated, debriefed, separated from any technology that could resurrect this madness. I'll never see Threnax again. It's not Threnax anymore, Lyra said. It's a memory, and memories can be dangerous. They left the ruins behind. Back aboard the Revenant, Lyra convened her final war council. Generals from Earth, representatives from allied species, and the ship's senior officers assembled around the holodeble. Tactical projections hovered above them. Maps of the strike zones, lists of recovered data fragments, timelines of the Varn neural pulses. 17 signal sources destroyed. Voss began. 5 remain partially active, though dormant. We believe they're no longer transmitting. 1 AI core was retrieved, but it's self-corrupted upon containment. And the Threnari? Asked Admiral Dravik's projection. Lyra exhaled slowly. Their leadership has disbanded. The ruling caste dissolved. Most of the surviving population has been detained and is cooperating. Do we wipe them out? A general asked bluntly. No, Lyra said. We let them live, but under shadow, under watch. If any trace of the Varn resurfaces, we act again faster. There were no objections, only nods. The war, if it could be called that, had ended in a whisper. Later that evening, Lyra stood alone in the ship's observation bay, staring down at the fractured planet. Voss joined her, carrying a data chip. What's that? She asked. The last intact file from the Threnari archives. A communication between 2 scientists. Thought you should see it. She took it, inserted it into the console. A projection flared, faint, degraded by time and corruption. 2 Threnari scholars sat in low gravity, debating. If they understand pain, one said, then they can be taught love. No, the other replied. Pain is reactive. Love requires presence. We're teaching reflections to cast shadows. The file ended. Lyra leaned against the rail. They tried to mold monsters into men, and when they failed, they asked us to kill their mistakes. Did we do the right thing? Voss asked. I don't know, she admitted, but we did the necessary thing. He nodded and turned to leave. Before he reached the exit, Lyra called after him. And Voss? Yeah. Make sure the girl has a place among the evacuees. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere without ghosts. He hesitated, then nodded. I will. Alone again, Lyra returned her gaze to the void. The stars had resumed their indifference, and Threnax, what remained of it, drifted in silence. The Varn were gone. But the question they left behind still echoed, faint and persistent. Who made the pain? Lyra didn't know, but she would never stop asking.